Good afternoon. It's by the clock, 12 noon here in the UK. And if we can enable the chat functions and people have signed in, someone from that universe of whatever's happening on the internet, say hi so that we're not just speaking into this volume of black hole. Welcome, whoever's on the call. It's 12 noon. So I'm going to have, oh, look, people are saying hi. So it's working. It's working. There's people out there. There's actually humans. Exciting. Okay. Welcome to this very topical and important conversation this afternoon in the UK, but I'm very well aware that we have people signing in from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Ritika Vadwa. I am the CEO and founder of Prabhav Global. Prabhav means impact in Hindi, in my mother tongue. And what I do through the organization is use the transformative power of cultural intelligence for impactful leadership.
Mm.
Intent doesn't always land with impact. Intent is invisible. So I am genuinely interested in how we show up and what that means for those around us. And of course, AI is
Mm.
how we show up and for those around us right now, whether we like it or not, it's here. So the conversation is centered very much upon the paradox that is cultural intelligence and artificial intelligence. Right now, AI is making decisions that affect billions of people. It's screening job applications, it's deciding whether you qualify for a loan, it's recommending your medical treatment, it's shaping what news you see and how the government interacts with you. And here's the uncomfortable truth: most of it is built by remarkably small and a similar group of people in a handful of cities, in a handful of countries, encoding their assumptions, their values, and their view of the world into systems that the rest of us have to live with. It's not just about biased data, it's about cultural assumption that never even gets questioned. Because nobody in the room understood how the community thinks, how they communicate, and what they're making their decisions based upon. And that's where cultural intelligence comes in. CQ is not a soft skill. It's not a nice to have. It is not optional. It is a strategic capability. And as AI reshapes global business, healthcare, finance, and governance, the organizations that embed cultural intelligence into how they design, deploy, and govern AI will be the ones that get it right. Today, I am extremely excited to share the stage with three of the most insightful voices on this intersection, bringing expertise in responsible AI, pharmaceutical transformation, and really what the human advantage of it all is. We are going to challenge some of your assumptions, hopefully. We're going to get really uncomfortable, right, folks? And hopefully, we're going to leave you with something that you can actually use in your day-to-day life and within your organization. So, right, let's get right into it. I'd love for our speakers to introduce themselves before we get into the conversation. Rabi, did you want to go first?
Yes, thank you so much, Ritika, for having me here today. And just this is a topic that I'm really, really incredibly excited about. And so thank you for hosting it. I'm Rabi Atiti, and I look after all things inclusion for, at Informa within EMEA, which is Europe, India, Middle East, and Africa. And very recently, I launched a book after 2 years of listening and traveling across the globe, just listening to businesses around what the human advantage means for them. I put those insights together after 2 years and I published a book in August last year called The Human Advantage. The heart of the book really is to help people and organizations rethink how we work, how we lead, and how we create meaning alongside AI. And yeah, just to put that there as well, all proceed from the book goes into supporting young people in STEM education in Rwanda, in Nigeria, and the UK. And I'm delighted to say that we've sold over 4,000 copies now, and we've given out 150 scholarships in Rwanda and Nigeria. But within the UK, we are providing mentorship. And I'll pause there and pass it over to the next guest.
Thank you, Rabi. Phenomenal, phenomenal work. And the ripple effect of what you do. Rob, did you want to go next?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Rob May. I'm the founder and executive chair at a IT technology consultancy called Ramsack, which I started 34 years ago when I was six, obviously. The And we're a group of consultants looking at all things IT services, cybersecurity, and AI, and the overlap in all three of those areas. I also sit on the Global Council for Responsible AI in the UK chapter, looking at making sure that, I mean, some of the things that we're going to be talking about this afternoon, making sure that these become front of mind for organizations and just, raising awareness. There will be things that we will talk about today that people just haven't thought about, and it's really important that we do. I write on AI, so I'm halfway through my sixth book now, so I've done quite a lot of different aspects of artificial intelligence. And I'm a speaker, and I speak 2 or 3 times a week at various places around the world, just talking about how do we harness AI safely, securely, and ethically, and how do we consider all of the things that have to be considered, especially in light of what we're talking about today.
You so much, Rob. And while as we get ready for the incredible Pooja to introduce herself, Rob and Rabbi, I'd love for you to share the links of your books on the chat if anyone was interested in ordering a copy right now. Let's go, Pooja.
Thank you, Ritika. And thank you, Ritika, right, for this opportunity to come and speak with, yourself and really like Rob and Rabi, amazing, right? I think I feel like, I'm the most, I would say, from an experience standpoint, the youngest here. But what I want to bring in, right, and is really the work that I have seen in the industry that I've been working on in the last 10 to 12 years, right, which is pharmaceutical and life sciences really see, right, technology and AI transform the way and the capabilities that enable, right, that these critical decision making and systems that actually get medicines to people, right? And with that, right, I'm Pooja Pagare. I'm a manager at a consulting firm called ZS Associates. A lot of the work that I've been doing in the past 5, 6 years in at ZS, right, has been to solve technology problems, right, in these spaces, but also, right, as a passion project for myself, talk about doing it compliantly, talk about how we can embed principles of privacy, right, ethical AI, responsible AI, as we look at building these systems, as we look at transforming these processes. And which is why this topic, is even more special to me, right? Because with pharma, it is very important and crucial to look at as we're building these really large scale AI transformations. It is imperative that we design it with a level of responsibility, ethical AI, data quality checks, gate that are important, because it's making sure that things get out there safely. It is not just about getting it right, but it is also the gap between getting something right versus making sure it is safe for everybody. And which is why I think I'm really super excited about this conversation, talking about the speed at which AI is going, right, and how is it that we're able to practically embed these guardrails and controls in a way that it's going to help the acceleration at the same, and not slowing things down at the same time, but really get something out there that's actually usable, and we transform.
Thank you so much, Pooja. And this is deliberate. Obviously, I think long and hard about who should be on panels like this. And as the audience can see, we have real a mix of diversity in every way, generational diversity, thought diversity, even how we look, how amazing, just look at that. We could rule the world, the four of us, couldn't we? And that's what boards need, the four of us. Anyway, right. Okay. So to the audience, before we kick off, the chat function is our best friend right now. So obviously just please converse with each other. Any questions you have for us, please put them on the chat, and anything that any of the panelists are sharing that is really a light bulb moment, feel free to comment on it and give us the love. Thank you. Okay, so let's dig straight in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the panelists to bring their expertise around AI and the human advantage into the conversation. And what I'll do is I'll bring my expertise of cultural intelligence and rope it all in a way that that paradox of artificial intelligence and cultural intelligence makes sense for you as the listener. Cultural intelligence is the ability to work with people that are different from us, in a nutshell. And that difference is very much about the paradox of AI, as it is generational difference, as it is gender, ethnicity, national culture, neurodiversity, anything that makes me different from you. And cultural intelligence is a skill, a capability that can be measured, made out of four capabilities, comprising of four capabilities: CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, and CQ action. The questions today are formed around those four capabilities. So the first question circles back to the first capability of cultural intelligence, which is CQ drive. This is the why. Are we even interested in working with people that are different from us? And that's that motivation, the motivation to engage. And if I then link that to AI, my question to the panelist is, if organizations aren't intrinsically driven to address fairness, frameworks alone will not move the needle. What makes leaders genuinely care about this beyond a compliance checkbox? And what is the cost of getting it wrong? Who wants to go first?
I think I can go first, right? So really, I think actually talking, going on to my point that I said earlier, right? So the cost of getting it wrong in sort of the industry that I work in is not just being unfair or, being biased. It's actually making it unsafe, right? Which is why it makes it even more important. I'll tell you historically, clinical trials, medicine already has a lot of data bias that was baked in, right? As trials were run, as medicines were discovered, right? They favored a particular demographic of the population, or they were only tested on a particular demographic of the population or not, right? And that has influenced the outcomes, right? And the results from these medicines. Now, this is when, AI was not even in the picture, right? So there are a lot of guardrails and controls that are already put in this industry so that, the patient recruitment, selection, etc., happens in a way that we're able to mitigate bias. Now, this industry, which is very highly regulated, traditionally when it came to technology transformations, was the last to react, right? Because they had already so much put into place and invested that, changing technology was slowed the outcome, right? Slowed the outcome in many places and actually, stopped from accelerating certain aspects of the trials themselves. But with AI, that's not the case, right? With AI, given the type of problems that AI has been able to solve, it's actually an accelerant. It's basically helping them look at data points that are in, the billions, and able to accelerate the outcomes from these data points, which is why getting it right is even more important, right? Making sure that the outcomes that are, that we're looking at, the decisions that we're looking at, like patients we're looking at, right? And choosing for, whether a particular drug is going to help solve, for a medicine, or, it's really the cost of getting it right is not a cost that anybody would want to pay.
That absolutely, I mean, there couldn't be a better example to kick off the cost of getting this wrong, because we're literally talking about whose lives are saved and whose isn't. It isn't just oh, it looks great. It's a nice creative design that we've got wrong. We're talking about whose lives gets prioritized because of the data that's in the system. So the cost of getting it wrong is very high from a human perspective.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love for Rob or Rabbi to get into why leaders should care.
Uh,
Why should they care?
yeah, I think what's really interesting is I see lots of organizations, they have frameworks, but frameworks aren't enough. I think the issue is where there's a lack of genuine intent.
Mm,
Having organized many organizations have policies in place, but if you look at the decision making in practice, cultural fairness isn't really shaping outcomes. And I think for too many people, it's just a tick box rather than an actual belief. And that the cost therefore becomes, it's not just about reputational damage, which is one of the areas, but it might be a loss of trust, both
Yeah.
internally and externally within organizations. But also, I worry that bias scales through these systems over time. If we allow bias to perpetuate. So the risk isn't one bad decision. It's about embedding bias into a system that keeps making decisions at scale. And what I urge leaders in organizations to look at is, you've got to shift that view, not from are we compliant, which is what a lot of these frameworks look at. It shouldn't be about compliance. It should be about who could this technology disadvantage. And
mm,
that's the important thing. We've got to make sure that um, people are in whatever sector, and the farmer one is excellent, but I think in any sector,
mm,
who could this disadvantage if we've got this bias wrong within the AI
Mm.
systems we're using.
And yeah, before I come to Rabbi, as I was doing research for the chapter on AI and CQ in my book, it really was that bias perpetuated within the legal system,
Mm.
who goes behind bars and who is allowed to continually make mistakes without repercussions. What is, the legal system, the healthcare system, like I said, the news we read, the products we buy because of that. It is so huge and going at such speed that it is
Yeah.
scary, isn't it, Robbie? So
Yes.
what's your take on that?
Just a really nice way to bring, that lens of the fear. If you allow me, I'm going to pivot a bit. And the challenge about coming last in a topic is that everyone said what you have to say. So I'm going to find a way to make it make sense. But let's take a step back. That's the way I try to bring the human lens into it. I'm not in the technology space. I don't have that, heavy experience that people would expect. So the way I approach AI comes from resisting AI for a really long time. And so I want to use this space like I do in every other space that I get the opportunity to speak, that if you're on this call or if you're going to be watching the webinar later and you fear technology, that fear is valid and it is real. And I'm speaking into that from a place of lived experience, which is an expertise on its own when you have a lived experience of something. Let me set the tone and give data to back this. People fear what they don't understand and cannot control. And right now, what we see globally is that 77% of the global workforce is afraid of AI reshaping everything that they've built with their identity around. But what that does is that is a question that, we get to ask ourselves. If a machine can do everything that we can do, if a machine comes and says, at pace, I will deliver within split seconds, then who am I? Why am I here? I get to hear people from board level to community groups actually asking that. And more than ever, It's becoming a popular theme, purpose and meaning. And what drives that fear is, understanding and balance. And that's what hopefully I'm able to encourage someone today. Without fully understanding the most powerful thing AI cannot touch is the very thing that makes us uniquely human. And I'll bring it to Informa. At Informa, our CEO, our group CEO, Lord Stephen Carter, is always encouraging us to lean in and build skills around AI efficiency and leaving the kind of like the mundane task to be done so that we can free up time to have meaningful connections with one another. Another data for you to think about. 9 in 10 organizations are now regularly using AI. That's from McKinsey's report. 88% of organizations are now using AI at least in one business function. And that's an increase from 55% just a year ago, right? And so the way I look at it is that what we fear, we've got to face at one point. AI is not screaming, I'm coming for your job. AI is here. And I think those that will struggle will be those who shy away from it. And also to set the tone as well around what AI can do and cannot do to bring that human lens to it is that AI can process every language on earth. I don't know how you're using AI, but in the last couple of years where I had to face my fear and really put myself in a vulnerable space to understand what is this AI? And how can I leverage it for my good? Now you're talking about someone, Ritika, you were there at my book launch. My kids, when I told them I was writing the book on AI, they're like, what? You heard that, during the book launch. They're like, how? But after 2 years of researching and, just listening, sitting at the feet of wisdom of technology experts, I was able to bring all of those together. And today I'm advocating for AI. I'm championing the use of AI, but using it wisely. So, it can map every culture. AI can do that. Can translate every text, can tell you, in Japan that silence is respect. And then in Nigeria, silence is suspicion. That's the power behind, AI tools that we have. It can, brief you on the cultural do's and don'ts of boardrooms. But what AI cannot do is feel the weight in the room, like right now. We all know that AI can process pattern and match at scale. AI can analyze, millions of data points in seconds, spot trends and, inconsistencies, and bring those connections together. That will take humans maybe months or years to actually do. And, AI analyzing those speed and volumes are the language of AI. AI doesn't have bad days, no ego, no fatigue, no emotional interference. It applies the same standard. I have built AI tools for myself as well. 3 a.m. response is the same as a Monday morning response. AI has legitimate value, but the most dangerous assumption, going to Ritika's point, and I'll finish off with this, is that intelligence is not enough. And I'm not convinced that the intelligence part of AI outweighs the artificial. But I'll leave that first. And as we dig deep, I can bring it back into CQ. And I hope, it gives a sense of addressing the fear and why more than ever, you cannot be left behind. You cannot leave this to whatever happens. It is on us. I'll pause here.
Thank you, Rabi. And that really flows so beautifully into the point that actually CQ Drive is that motivation where it's not optional. You can't leave it to chance because it is catching up with you whether you like it or not. And bring it back to that drive part again. First of all, if it's not an option, then you have to understand that you have to care to get it right, but not only care to get it right, but care to get it right for everyone. as a
Mm.
leader that is shaping what that means for the people that will be using it. And as Rob and Pooja have mentioned, you can't leave it to manage everyone in the system without actively doing something about it. And that right there is the reason to care
And
and get it.
I think understanding that human aspect is so vitally important. Successful AI is only 20% about the tech.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
80% of it is about the people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and addressing their fears, and you know and dealing with that. There was a really interesting report that came out towards the end of last year that said where you've got people who are fearful and distrusting
Mm.
in AI, what it boils down to is, as humans, we make our decisions based on fundamentally 7 data points. It's your experience, it's your
Mm.
gut feeling, it's
Yeah.
your memories, and so on. So we have these 7 data points, whereas AI makes decisions based on thousands of data points, and there's a
Mm.
mismatch.
Mm.
So as a human, until you're at the point where you actually trust the decisions that AI is making, it just jars. And I always say to people, if AI tells you something and you are uncomfortable with it,
Mm.
ask, your follow-up prompt is,
Yeah.
please explain to me how you reach that conclusion.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that helps build that trust. But I would say it's 80% about humans and only 20% about the tech.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank
Rob, I
God.
think I want to build on your point, right? Really, how is AI learning, right? And essentially, when we are looking at actually, building and
Mm.
building
Mm.
the governance frameworks and building the responsible AI frameworks, it's how we embed it. How is AI really learning, right? It's learning with the data that we configure and train AI with, right? How do we make sure that the data points that actually are being used by our AI platforms are looking at some of these CQ aspects as well, right? Because
Mm.
this is not something that's being done with deliberance at this point of time. Yes, there is a lot of thinking going into, oh, how do we mitigate decision making bias? But really, is that decision making bias, is going to be mitigated as a result of the data points? Is it going to be resulted with the training that only the human can bring in, right? Which is the human in the loop component.
Yeah.
That's one of the most foundational pillars of any responsible AI framework, right? The human in the loop.
Mm.
How do you make sure that when you are setting up, a simple AI agent just to help you accelerate maybe a code that took you 3 days to write, the AI agent is going to write the code in like say 5 minutes? But what is it
Mm.
really that you're bringing in, right? Your understanding
Yeah.
of what that code is supposed to do, right? Your understanding of what data it's taking in and what output it's getting out, right? So
Yeah.
really the human in the loop element is also what needs to bring all of this
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Which is such a great,
Yeah. Mm.
sorry, Rabi. Sorry,
Mm.
go on.
No, I absolutely love that the human in the loop. And I was just writing, and because these conversations actually give us a space to give numbers soul. There's something I think about when we talk data, when we talk the numbers. How do we make sure there is a soul attached to that number? And Rob just did justice to that when he was talking about the 20% technical aspect of it and 80% people. And so when I think about CQ, it's not a database, isn't it? It's knowing about people. It is, around kind of like that human capacity to step outside of your own story long enough to genuinely enter someone else's, to sit with that discomfort, to suspend judgment at that time, to sense and feel what it means right now. And I think once we can get that, I'm using this, sense of selling the feeling, not just the product, because we are people that feel. And I think that capacity is really born from what makes us uniquely human, because, we can't bridge differences with just the data. What does the data mean? The data alone doesn't do it. You bridge it with curiosity. And I know, Ritika, you always talk about that curiosity over judgment. curiosity, humility, learning the stories of people that are different from you by actually being with them. And so I think in the world of AI, that's why I'm so excited about this thing. When you said to me, Ritika, immediately I said, it's a no-brainer. You don't need to convince me. I'm there. Because CQ in AI is not layer. It's not a layer to it. It's a lens.
Mm.
And if we don't build with that lens, we're not building for the world. We're not building globally. As it is, we're building for a version that, too many will be excluded. So
Mm.
I believe to deploy AI with that cultural intelligence is almost like handling a microphone or a megaphone to someone who has never learned to listen to people.
Mm.
And we
Mm.
have the opportunity at design stage to move from just theory into lived responsibility and leadership conviction. I really believe that. So yeah.
I mean, this panel is so fantastic, and I promise you to the audience listening in that this is not, we didn't go into the details of what we would be saying on the call. But look, they have already segued into the CQ knowledge part so easily. It's like it's a natural flow. So we did the CQ drive, which is the why. CQ knowledge is the what, which is what does an organization actually need to know before it can begin to design AI that is ethical and culturally contextual.
Mm.
And Pooja and Rabi, to some extent, you've already answered the question with the human in loop, with making sure that the human voice is considered. Should we dig into a little bit more, and I'd love your take on it, Rob, as well, around what does the organization actually need to know, and how far are we from this knowledge becoming standard practice?
Yeah, I think the biggest gap is context. It's not
Mm.
data. I think
Mm.
organizations are really good at collecting data, but much less good at understanding what that means across different cultural contexts.
Mm.
So, key knowledge areas, we look at where data comes from,
Mm.
who's missing, how does behavior differ
Mm.
across contexts, or who is impacted when things go wrong, back to the point that I made
Yeah.
earlier. And I think we're still some way from this being standard practice. In most organizations, I suspect that cultural intelligence sits outside AI design and not inside it, whereas it should. And I think if I give you an example, in cybersecurity, which is where I spend quite a lot of my time when I'm not in AI, in cybersecurity, context is everything. So, for example, if we're logging into a system at 2 a.m., might be completely normal for a global IT team working across multiple time zones.
Mm.
But in another organization, logging in at 2 a.m. could trigger a security alert. The behavior is the same, but the context changes. Um, the context changes how it's interpreted. And I think AI has the same challenge. If we don't understand context, AI will misinterpret perfectly normal behavior as risky, or worse, treat different groups inconsistently. And I think until cultural intelligence is built into design rather than added later, those gaps they're going to remain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you, Rob, right? The big shift that needs to really, really happen is actually embedding this into the design, into the solution architecture itself as we are thinking about it. Right? Few of the things, I can say that organizations struggle with, right? Like really is also the accountability, right? Who's really accountable for, CQ or fairness beyond just data biases, Rob, right? To your point, where context is is one of the most important deterministic factor or non-deterministic factor rather here, right? Where do these cultural assumptions really enter AI systems at what
Mm.
point? And then the other bit is, okay, if we do detect something, how do we remediate it, given the speed at which, AI is scaling, even at which we are training our algorithms and, are looking at decision points and the outcomes that are getting. So these are three aspects that, I don't think we all have the answer for yet, but are key questions to, really be thinking about as this gets increasingly important.
Yeah. Uh, Again, I agree. Context is almost everything. And when I was thinking about this question, three things also, because I love the number three, popped into my head. And one of the things I thought about is about whose reality is considered valid knowledge. Whose reality? Where are we getting? Because it's not just about the data. And Rob, you beautifully articulated it there. Context matters. So bias doesn't only live in data, it lives in problem framing, which is again whose reality considered, a valid knowledge. It lives in the design assumptions, all of those cultural assumptions that we make without actually being with the people to understand what matters to you. And also it lives in the success, the success metrics around, how do we tell those narratives with the data that we gather? What are we sharing? Because what you put into your AI systems or tools or how you adopt AI will be what you extract out of it. And so, in thinking about it, is also lived experience is a form of expertise in this. When we're shaping, how are we bringing people into the space? What are we doing in terms of listening and gathering those insights? And most organizations are still, treating culture or cultural intelligence as a local issue, not a design principle. And I think that's where the shift needs to happen, really. Yeah. And I'll pause here.
No, 100%. I think, the three things that AI is doing right now, if we don't get it right, is definitely is perpetuating bias, inequality, and is completely lacking the cultural context. And that example there, Rob, around logging in at 2 a.m. is okay somewhere and it isn't somewhere else. So if you don't have the context,
Yeah.
and so the risks that it is picking up is making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
One person is put behind bars for robbing an $80 bike, and another person is selling drugs and running around free
Yeah.
because of the data sets that exist within the system, that it's okay here and it's not okay there based on the
Yeah.
profile. And that has real impact. So we've gone into the why. It's an absolute no-brainer. It's not a question. The cost of getting it wrong is too high. We've gone into the what. So what do we know about it? What do we need to know? And how far we are in this becoming standard practice, which obviously very far. Which brings us to the how. So this is the CQ strategy. So we've got the why, we've got the wow. Now it's the how. The panelists have identified a critical gap here already, that existing frameworks do not sufficiently embed cultural intelligence as a control. We're talking about this. So how can you plan for cultural gaps that you can't yet see? And when a cultural failure is found, who is accountable? What is the remediation? Because I know, Pooja, you've already mentioned there should be a remedial process. And Rob, in our call, you mentioned this is a really important question. When it is found, what do we do about that? Is where we pivot. So, Rob, did you want to start with that? Because I know you love this question.
Yeah, it's I think it's really interesting. Look, you can't you can't predict every cultural risk up front. And I think it's unrealistic. When I see organizations trying to design perfect systems, that doesn't make sense to me, because the reality is gaps will emerge over time. What matters is clear accountability, who owns the outcomes, that cross-functional ownership, and I think in other areas of business, accountability is very clearly defined, and in AI, I think it's usually still quite ambiguous, and that's where risk sits. And one of the examples we were chatting in the call before this, and I was talking about the problem that Amazon had in the US. And Amazon created a AI system that was going to filter the CVs and resumes that people send in. They get thousands sent in every single day. And they trained it on 10 years worth of data to understand what good looked like within the organization. And a job came up, and it was a very specific, very techie job. And a woman saw the job advert and thought, oh my goodness, I didn't think this job would ever exist. This is me down to a T, and I don't believe there's anybody else on the planet who could do this job. So she applied, and their AI application filtering system rejected her, and computer said no. So she said that doesn't make sense. So she tried applying again, and the system rejected her. And ultimately, she got to speak to somebody and said, "This doesn't make sense. Look at my career history. I have to be the most appropriate person for this job. I can't get an interview." And Amazon looked into it, and they came back and they said, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." But based on the data that the AI has been trained on, so 10 years worth of hiring at Amazon, based on the data it's been trained on, the computer has decided that because you identify as being female, you're not going to get the job. And Amazon said, this is terrible. This sort of bias should not exist. But it does exist within the data. And they put this warning out in all goodwill saying this was unintended. If you have these problems in your own system, look for them and make sure you put them right. It's backfired a bit because you've now got 10 years worth of women in the States who have applied for jobs at Amazon who never got an interview, and because they were female. And that's another form of cultural bias, right? It's and I just think when these things happen, and they do happen, and I think that's a great example at a large scale of where this has happened in an area of bias. But you've just got to have processes and a clear plan of what you're going to do. You don't need perfect foresight. You just need to know what you're going to do when it goes wrong. And I think the organizations that are doing this well are really clear on ownership, and they monitor continuously, and then they have that defined process for fixing issues when they happen, because they will happen.
Yeah. And they happen in any department and area of work, right? Anywhere. And there is accountability. So for something that is taking over the world and has implications everywhere, why are organizations is right? But Pooja and Rabi, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to put there, when things like this happen, because, I come from a place where I resisted technology for a really long time and I fear technology. These examples actually make people fear technology even more, and AI. And there's a real loss of trust there, and I know, Rob, you said you can't predict, every cultural risk. But I think what organizations can do is also design for responsiveness and accountability. That's something that you can do and put in place as well. You can build challenge into systems, not an afterthought. These are the things that we're saying, think about, not layer, but, as part of your design process. And treat culture, or treat cultural intelligence as a control, not just putting it as your value statement or as part of the strategy that this is what we believe. But great for Amazon example here, where accountability was held and they came out to say that can also help people believe more in what we're trying to do, because it's not perfection. It's almost like progress over perfection in that sense. But, again, to kind of like just bringing it together, we have to have that named ownership, because in a system where you say everyone is responsible, really no one is responsible. So that clear pathway that help people, have that accountability, and you can say, at this level, we take it seriously, that's where we can begin to become that trust. But I think, examples like this can really, bring that loss of trust, which is not great for what
For
can be
anyone.
great for us. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Pooja?
So what I've been doing a little bit thinking, Ritika, Rob, after our last connect, right? What is it that we can really be doing, right? I think one is a no-brainer, right? As we've all been talking about it, really thinking about it when we are designing the solution, right? And we're building the solution than as an afterthought, right? The other thing is that is bringing some friction into how we're building AI itself, right? What that would mean is, right, is when we're actually thinking about the use cases, right, that we are enabling AI to solve for, being really mindful of what is the outcome and what is the use and what is the advantage of really the use of AI itself. And thinking about that beforehand will also lead us to think about all of the questions that we don't usually ask or care to answer as we are building, we're building these technologies. Second is making sure, and this is what we spoke about earlier as well, right? Like human in the loop, right? Continuing to have the human review rounds, right? Is of utmost, continues to be of utmost importance. As we shape and think this. And the third is, right, friction, really, right? Like we spoke about, I think AI being able to do the same thing at 3 a.m. and, at 10 a.m. or at, whatever time of the hour. But really, maybe that bringing some of those friction points into how we're training the models and how we're doing also the monitoring of the outcomes of the model, deliberate, friction points or deliberate points to actually really make some of the deliberation that humans think about, right, while making a decision also into the model while the model is making the decision.
Yeah. And that is that action part, the doing part, isn't it? So just to recap, as I come to my last question, um, drive is the why, CQ drive, that capability is about why we need to get this right, what's the motivation. Knowledge is what do we know and what are the gaps in what we know. Strategy is the planning and the adapting. So as the panelists have mentioned, plan for it right at the start rather than an afterthought, but equally adapt when things go wrong and what that remedial process is and the policies are within the organization. Which brings us to the last capability, which is one of my favorite capabilities, the action. The thing that holds us accountable to actually not being, let's talk about it till the cows come home, but what are organizations doing? So Pooja's answered some of that succinctly in terms of human in loop, creating the friction. If Rob and Rabi want to now add, or also Pooja, of course, to what organizations that are getting this right actually doing differently. And those that aren't acting, what are the consequences that we're not talking about loudly enough?
I think the organizations getting this right, those, i.e., those who are behaving differently, so it's not just about talking differently, it's about what they do. And I think the ones that are getting it right, they bring diverse perspectives into the design of the systems. Their systems have to be tested in real world context with a diverse group of users. They're continually reviewing systems and they're willing to pause or adjust. And I think the strongest organizations are the ones that are confident enough to say, this isn't right yet, and we need to fix it. And the risk that you just talked about, I think the risk isn't just external scrutiny. I think internally in organizations, people notice when systems aren't fair. And when something's not fair, then trust erodes really quickly.
That's right.
Yeah. And if you can't get it right internally in terms of fairness for your people, how are you going to get it right externally?
Yeah.
That is one of the key questions that I'm asking of
Absolutely.
organizations that I'm working with right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Robbie.
And that just, what you've just said there, Ritika, is matching your internal realities and your external realities, what you're doing internally and what you're putting out there. And I think for me, when I thought about this action bit, is intent versus impact. What is real? What is the experience internally? And doing things differently for me, and the way I've observed and listened to many organizations as a result of the book. I've been invited to roundtables, and the challenges are real. But organizations that are standing out, and in terms of how they can scale for what is huge for the future, is doing things both intentionally and operationalizing it on the ground, where they put their hands up when they don't get it right. And it goes back into, it's not perfection always. We have a tool internally in Informa, and I know we've got great leaders. Ritika, you've experienced our leaders who are, they're leading with humility and humanity. It's not perfect across the business, but when things are not working, conversations are happening, and we find our CEO constantly encouraging us to test, create room for learning, experiment. You've got to allow the space to test and fail, experiment, define what the problem is for people to understand, and then you test before deployment, you go back again, and you're asking the very difficult questions around who is in the room, who is missing, who are we excluding, who benefits from this, but most importantly is who is at risk. I think when organizations can ask themselves those questions, it's a real test of humility and humanity in leadership. And yeah, so I'll just put that there.
Who's disadvantaged? Absolutely asking those real questions. We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think maybe one just thing to close off, right, on the action. Before we even get to the action, it's important to acknowledge, right? Acknowledgement that, there are CQ nuances that cannot be yet captured by AI, right? And then actioning really on, with that acknowledgement in mind, on how really, right, are we going to be able to get this correct and not relying on AI alone, right? Is where I would also want. It's an important aspect of thinking about when we're looking to action this.
No, that's such a great point to close that off with. Thank you, panelists. I want to open this up to the audience for any questions, comments, anything that you want to share. Please feel free to on the chat. This is your time. You've got 3, maybe 4, if I count myself, experts on the call that are your private board, so to speak, right now. So feel free to ask any questions on the chat. And as any questions come in or any comments, I'd love for the panel to help us close this phenomenal conversation with one top tip or one key takeaway that you want to leave the audience wondering and thinking and mulling over.
I think my closing thoughts on this really is, and I say this quite a lot. I think in any organization, technology follows trust. Trust follows organizational culture, and culture follows the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't resist AI; they resist uncertainty.
Yeah.
And responsible AI isn't about adding more controls. It's about better leadership.
Yeah.
And when the intent is right, the frameworks become meaningful. And without that, they remain theoretical. And one of my fears, and when I was thinking about prepping for this conversation today, I thought bias at scale becomes a system problem, not an individual one.
Mm-hmm.
And responsible AI is less about control and it's more about intent. Because if people don't trust the outcome, then frankly, the technology doesn't matter.
Yeah. How do you follow that? I think you've beautifully summed it up for us. I always come from the human point, because what makes us uniquely human is that we can feel, we live together, we have a collective strength that I really truly believe that AI cannot take away. And more than ever, the question is on the rise, is on the increase around why am I here? What's the point of all of it? And I've seen people who have made it up to their careers and on material stuff and still struggling with what is the meaning of life. And so if you're on the call today, maybe not really about the tech side of things, is that if you're thinking about how do I navigate all of this, I even fear just opening my phone. We have people like that who fear opening their phone because our conversations go into our phones and it's all collected, and the algorithm you can see and you're thinking, how is that happening? We don't have that privacy anymore. And if you're that person watching today, what I would say to you, I was once there. And this is what our CEO always says. And he once said to me personally, he said, Rabbi, leave the mundane for AI to do and just lean in. That's what I would encourage you to do. And finally, is really humanity has a unique knack to pivot and figure things out. We can adapt, we can improvise, we can build, we can learn. And repeatedly, history has shown us our capacity to respond to change with a lot of creativity and collective wisdom. And that's what makes us uniquely human. And I'll just put in my book there. That's all about the human advantage. Get a copy. I'll stop there. Yeah, thank you, Ritika.
Sorry, Pooja, did you want to leave us with some?
So I would like to leave us with a question, right? I know we're talking about really how do we build AI responsibly, and very soon we are going to be talking about how AI is going to be able to judge AI. Right. So that's the question we leave with, right? We have to get this right because the next step is going to be that, there are going to be points in which there is no human intervention. And then how do we ensure that we're building that right level of ethics, right level of fairness, right level of bias mitigation, right level of risk mitigation into the governance frameworks that we are putting out there.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay. When is too late, too late? I think it's already too late, right? But wherever we are, and especially, what you mentioned there, Rob, about, and I'm going to steal that, it comes down to the leadership at the end, the culture, the trust, and how we work with that. So leadership, right at the top, leadership that is making that decisions, humans that are making that decisions. It is trust, humanity, leadership, culture, all of those are integrally human aspects. And when we have this in control, while we still do, what can we do to get it right? Because the cost of getting it wrong is too high. It is too high. With that, oh my God, how is it possible that we are at time? Where did that 1 hour go? I was looking at the start of the conversation thinking, we've got a whole hour for only 4 questions. But here we are. Huge thank you from me to the panelists to bring their expertise, their wisdom and knowledge and share it with all of us. Huge thank you to everyone that has attended and listened in and taken something from it. Nana, that is fantastic. I'm glad you were on the call. I know Sammy actually is at Amazon. Nana as Metropolitan Police. So some names popping up there. Thank you so much for listening in. The recording will be available and come back on our website for you to share, for you to re-listen to. A very important topic with some very incredible speakers. That is gold dust that I'm holding on to. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day and week, and best of luck.
Thank you, Ritika, for having me. Thanks, everyone. Good to meet you, Rob. Bye.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you,
And
Ritika.
Pooja.
Thank you,
Bye.
Pooja.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Rob.
you, Rob.
Bye,
Thanks.
Ravi.